Maybe it's considerably more difficult than many might think to be able to fully understand the emotional, cultural, psychological makeup of a country. And the UK, a complex animal it is, and it's an animal having an identity crisis in the past few years. And it could very well be on the brink of an economic crisis, but having said that, understanding the modern state isn't an impossible task. The legacy of the 1980s still looms large. So yeah, Blair and Cameron had their times in the sun, but who were they if not the children of Thatcher? Whether you loved her or despised her with every fibre of your being, you can't ignore her historical imprint. Do I think that the Falklands War was a hugely significant historical event in and of itself? Not really. But the way the media and the public latched onto it, it strapped a rocket to Mrs. T. Personally and politically, I thought she was trash, a homophobic, capital punishment supporting, dictator supporting, racist, British supremacist, turd sandwich of a human being. All that being said, she wasn't lacking in intelligence. She was well educated, comfortably winning general elections. She knew how to divide the opposition. You might be tempted to call her an extremist of sorts, opposing German reunification, her views on Mandela and the ANC, the way she and her government handled the hunger strikes in Northern Ireland, and of course crushing the miners using the police essentially as a tool of political repression. The manufacturing heartlands were devastated as a consequence of Conservative policies. She did succeed in getting dangerously high inflation rates under control, a successful deflationary policy. The end product, though, was a couple of million added to the dole queue and a recession. Yes, after the instability and economic woes of the 1970s, Thatcher comes along with a clearly radical idea of how to turn the country's fortunes around. You may well have heard of the Big Bang, not the birth of the universe, but deregulation of the banks and markets in 1986, effected by Thatcher. This is the model for how the UK economy works to this day. There is still a huge housing crisis in Britain today, which has its roots in the right to buy scheme. By the late 80s, more than 1 million council houses had been sold to their tenants. And it's the same ideology that led the Tories to promote contract competition and profiteering in the National Health Service, internal markets strategy. It's a commitment to this idea that the private sector can always run things or produce better outcomes than the state. Greed is a virtue, society is an illusion. Thatcher actually thought society didn't exist. The mind boggles. The poll tax was that regime's fatal error, though. It sowed the seeds of its own downfall. To sum it up, if you've never heard of it, it basically was attempted reform legislation, a community tax on a property being calculated not by an estimation of the property's market value, but by the number of folks living there. Well, this ends up penalising, effectively, large families who weren't living in particularly large housing. In reality, it was shifting a tax burden from the wealthy onto poorer families. Some of the most violent disorder in modern British history in London in 1990 was to follow. I can just about barely recall watching it on TV as a kid and being disturbed by what I was witnessing. So the Tories did reverse course on that policy, and they did get rid of Thatcher. Her crying selfish tears as she left Downing Street for the last time is a scene locked into the national psyche, I dare say. The last 30 years of British politics have indisputably been shaped by Thatcherism. And now the UK is again standing at the gates, or looking over a cliff edge, if you like, as the consequences of the 2016 referendum will shortly be felt. But whatever the weather, one suspects Britain will be feeling the effects, the legacy of Thatcherism for some time to come.